morning, everyone. This morning we got a kind of a complicated, long lesson, and by the fact of that, I'm going to try to compress a lot of this material. I'm going to try to keep it in a relevant context. There's so much fascinating stuff that goes on. I'd love to spend a couple of hours on each of these little sections. But this morning we're going to be looking at chapters 12 and 13 out of Gonzalez's book. And the first one's going to be dealing with the last, if you will, great persecution in the Roman Empire as it is. And then we're going to be looking as it plays out with Constantine. He's going to be a player in this whole process, but then we're going to shift from the persecution and the transition of power to Constantine and some of the things that come along with that. Now, as we've said, that there's going to be this major turning point here. We're about to enter what's referred to as the Imperial Church Age. So this is the transition between the last of the persecution by the Roman Empire of Christians to the transition where Christianity is favored. And that's going to bring a lot of interesting things. Now, to begin with, we are going to be looking at the persecution under Diocletian. Now, Diocletian was a guy who was actually very able, very capable man. He didn't really have any particular beef with Christianity or Christians. Matter of fact, his wife and daughter were both Christians. But he's going to, through a whole series of, if you will, intrigues or issues or whatever, he's actually going to be goaded into creating a lot of problems. And he's noted as the guy who is the largest persecutor of the church, and he is. But he didn't start out that way. And so we're going to watch and sort of see how this develops. Now, the time period we're talking about is Diocletian was the emperor of Rome, or actually in Constantinople, from 284 to 305. Okay? Now, he, as an administrator, realizes the Roman Empire is way too big for anybody to manage all by themselves. And we've seen this happen before. We've seen the challenges of trying to manage such a vast empire all by yourself. So he goes ahead and tries to split it up. Now, we know that doesn't necessarily work well, but he did his best given the opportunity he has. So what he does is he divides the empire in half. And then each of those halves are divided in sort of two levels of power and sort of in half again. He has two, what he calls Augustus, two co-emperors, if you will. And there's him and another man. He rules the East, and he's the supreme, if you will, emperor. And then there's another co-emperor, but he's the co-emperor, and he's the emperor of the West. And under each Augustus, if you will, each emperor, there are Caesars, one Caesar under each of them. And so this is trying to help stabilize things. So there's a succession. So when Augustus dies or leaves office or whatever, the Caesar who he had takes and becomes the Augustus, and that Augustus picks another Caesar. Now, that sounds great in theory, but you know how people are. So my incredible block map that I have behind me here, I'm going to sort of show you where each of these guys were, and this is going to be the sort of the stage or the platform that things are going to be played out on. So let me take a little moment and explain what we got here. Okay, this is the world. We have Britain up here. We have France, or Gaul at that particular time. We have Spain, or Iberia. We have Italy. We have North Africa. We have Egypt in here. As you go from France, you have the Germanic tribes, and this is where a lot of the invasions were coming. We have the Rhine River, which is a sort of the demarcation line, and the Danube River, which is the other demarcation line. You have Greece and all of the regions between Greece and Italy, and then you have Turkey, or at the time Asia Minor, down into Syria, Israel. Over in this area is where you go into the Persian Empire. This is where these guys are, the Persians are, and they're going to come into play here. And of course, down below Israel, you have Arabia at that time, and again, Egypt. Now, here's how he kind of divided things up. Sort of this line right here is the Eastern Empire, and over here is the Western Empire. And there, again, were two Augustuses in each and two Caesars in each. And they sort of divided those realms in half, if you will. So in the east, the one in black here is Diocletian, and he has his capital, if you will, in Constantinople. Later on, we're going to see Licinius come up. In Greece, and actually I think it's in Thessalonica, we have this gentleman named Galerius, and so he is the Caesar, and Diocletian is the Augustus for the East. In the West, you have in Italy, in northern Italy, you have this gentleman named Maximinian, and he is the one who is the Augustus on the west. And up north here in Trier, you have Constantius I, or Constantius Chlorus, and he is in northern France, right near the Rhine River and where the Germanic tribes are. And so he is the Caesar, Maximinian is the Augustus. And that seems like a pretty reasonable way of doing it, and they sort of divide up their little sections and lands in different areas that they have. And that's not overly important, except for the fact that four guys who have power are typically going to have just a little bit of a challenge. Now, we really don't see a lot of difficulty in the early days, but around 295, we see Galerius, who is the guy who really has the biggest difficulties, the biggest challenges from a military perspective, start to question the loyalty of Christians. Now, let me point out here, he's up in this area, and right across here we're getting a lot of invasions, a lot of threats. Even the Persians are sort of coming around, and so he's the guy who has the biggest turmoil, the biggest battles. His legions are actually constantly being bothered a little bit. Now, Constantius has a little bit here, but Galerius is the guy who has the major issue. Now, if you remember from earlier things we've talked about, we know that Christians were kind of divided as to whether they should be involved in military service or not, and what should happen. Well, there are some people who, hey, I need to leave, I want to get out, I shouldn't be in here. They convert when they're in the military. And if you think about it, a guy like Galerius is kind of saying, wow, I need some loyalty here. I need some people who are really going to stick with me. And if I don't have that, that could be an issue. Matter of fact, the more senior the guys get in the military, the Christians, the more dangerous this is. So he convinces a lot of Christians around 295 end up being condemned to death. They end up being begin a little bit of persecution. Now, some of them said, I just won't serve, which he didn't like. But what was even worse was people saying, I quit. I'm not going to serve. My conscience. I become a conscientious objector. And that type of a notion wasn't something that went over well with him. So he sees this as a major, major security issue. And he starts sort of lobbying with Diocletian. Now again, Galerius is the Caesar, Diocletian is the emperor, and they're right near each other. So he tries to influence him. And so Diocletian begins and says, all right, we're going to have a problem with these Christians. We have to keep the empire safe. So, okay, Galerius, I agree with you. We're going to expel all the Christians from the military. Now, if you're in the military and you kind of want to stay in the military, that's kind of a problem. And, of course, other people, that was happy days. The problem is Galerius not really caring for Christians too much. He actually persecutes them a lot more. Matter of fact, think about this. If you want to keep your best soldiers in the military, what you want to do is start getting them to deny that they're Christians. So he can say, okay, you're a pagan again. Cool, you can stay. And so, especially senior leaders, he's going to be pressuring and, torture a few people, say, sure, you can go, stab a couple of people. And you get this picture that he is really concerned about the security and the control of his forces, and Christianity is the hindrance. So you can get rid of the Christians, or if you can make them recant, you can keep your forces. So he's kind of happy with that. And a lot of his leaders sort of follow that suit, because you lose some of your best people, that's hard. Or even some of your, if you will, cannon fodder, even though they didn't have cannons at the time. You don't like it. So as this presses on a little bit further, Galerius convinces Diocletian to pass another edict. And this edict is to remove Christians from holding positions of power and responsibility within the empire. So not only is it dealing with the military, but he's also now dealing with the government. Now, this is going to be a big deal. And this persecution is going to get really intense, really severe, and it's going to last quite a long time. So, Christians were moved from the government. Christian buildings were destroyed. Books were burned. Scriptures were taken. I mean, this isn't just some localized thing. This wasn't Nero in Rome type of thing. This is empire-wide. And this is a very, very significant event because it's again, not just localized. Because you can imagine by this time, you're getting more and more Christians in the military, in the government, etc. Matter of fact, the Grand Chamberlain of the empire is a Christian. And we're going to see that he actually refuses to offer sacrifices to the gods, which is another edict, and they kill him. So this is the highest, if you will, government official in the empire says, I'm a Christian and no, I'm not going to sacrifice to the gods. They kill him. Now, the emperor's wife and daughter, Diocletian's wife and daughter, do offer the sacrifices, and so they're spared, even though they're Christians. Now, this really is a big deal because, and again, historians are a little bit two sides of this one. Galerius convinces Diocletian that after 2 fires were set or occur in the imperial palace, that it was the Christians who did it. They're mad because you kicked him out of the positions. They're mad because you kicked him out, and they tried to kill you, Diocletian. They tried to do this. Now, some Christian historians go, Galerius was the guy who was really behind it. But we don't know for the fact, whatever. But we do know that there were 2 fires, and after this is when that pressure comes on to sacrifice to the gods. And again, the Grand Chamberlain does not and dies, and the wife and daughter do. Diocletian also now says, all right, I'm really sick and tired of this stuff. These Christians clearly are trouble. So he issues a decree for all their leaders to be arrested. And that later, of course, they should sacrifice to the gods. The problem is that Christianity has had sort of this peaceful time, sort of floating along for 2, 3, 4 decades, 5 decades. And when this persecution hits, a lot of them go, whoa, 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 okay, I give. And that doesn't go over well, because again, remember we have the lapse and the confessors and all this kind of stuff. Well, we're still going to have that same kind of a challenge. But others, of course, hid, and some hid the Bibles or hid scriptures or hid things like that. And others actually left the empire. And guess where they went? They went right over here to Persia. And when they go over to Persia, that's the enemy. Matter of fact, isn't Galerius the guy who's fighting these tribes, and he fights the Persians? And so this confirms the worst fears that, hey, we've got spies among the Christians. They're totally disloyal to us. Now, as an emperor, you're not really crazy about that idea or that thought either. So this is between 295 to 304. And when we get to 304, we end up with Diocletian becoming ill. And Galerius takes advantage of this situation and basically forces Diocletian to relinquish his power. And Galerius takes it. And Galerius also threatens this guy over here, Maximian, and he relinquishes. Now, there's some interlopers that come in between here, but basically what ends up happening is Galerius is going to be the guy who's really takes over from Diocletian. He puts this guy Maximinus Daia in charge, and chaos happens. Well, while all this stuff is going on, we find out that Constantius, who is very popular over here, he's ruling well, things are going well. His son, Constantine, who was sort of under house arrest over here, escapes because they kept him to keep Constantius's loyalty. He escapes and goes over, and he is very popular with the troops. And when his father dies, Constantine is the guy that sort of takes charge. And all of these different kinds of things are happening, and Constantine is just strengthening, running things well, building his army. Because again, he doesn't have the most powerful army. The bulk of the population, the army, the military, the wealth is all over here. Matter of fact, also the bulk of the Christians are over here. We're going to talk more about that in a couple of lessons as we go forward. So as things continue, the persecution continues. Now, this is a very extended time period. Starts around 295, and I think it's right around 311, when Galerius finally, who becomes ill, he eventually becomes ill, he hears from some Christians, or people talking, saying, this is a punishment from God for you, your illness. And he basically goes, okay, I'm going to back off now. And I'm going to read you here, Gonzalez has in the book his an excerpt from his edict. I'm going to read this to you. This was on April 30th, 311. And he says, with all the laws which we have decreed for the good of the state, we have sought to restore the ancient rules and traditional disciplines of the Romans. We have particularly sought to have Christians who have abandoned the faith of their ancestors return to the truth. After the promulgation of our edict ordering all to return to the ancient customs, many obeyed for fear of danger, and we were forced to punish others. But there were still many who persisted in their opinions, and we are aware that they neither worship nor serve the gods, nor even their own God. Therefore, moved by our mercy to be benevolent towards all, it seems just to us to extend to them our pardon and allow them to be Christians once again, and once again gather in their assemblies as long as they do not interfere with public order. Another edict we shall instruct our magistrates regarding this matter. In return for our tolerance, Christians will be required to pray to their God for us, for the public good, and for them, so that the state may enjoy prosperity and they may live in peace. Now, what do you think about that? Yeah, it's kind of Christians are going, hey, this is what I should be doing. Matter of fact, that's what the Bible tells me to do. And so these guys, after all this persecution, all this difficulty, Galerius says, okay, be Christians again. Just pray for us, pray for the state, pray for yourselves, gather, assemble. All right, we give. Now, what do you think happens? What do you think happens to Galerius? Does he continue ruling on? Does he continue doing things well? Does things work out for him because he was so benevolent? Well, no. The guy dies, actually, I think it's 5 days later, I think it is. Yeah, 5 days later, Galerius dies. And so a lot of people go, well, too late. Yeah, you repented. Yeah, you recanted, but too late for you. And so 5 days after this, it's called the Edict of Toleration. Galerius dies. Well, now we have more political intrigue. Now we have more challenges. Now we have a new divided empire. So we have good old, I don't even know if this works here. We have good old Galerius, and he's gone. We have Diocletian, who's basically retired. We have Constantius, and he's dead. We have Maximinian, who is retired forcibly by Galerius. We still have this Maximinian Daia. We have another gentleman who's going to come on the scene, Licinus. We have Constantine, and then we have another gentleman called Maxentius, and there's some other guys who come in between here. But these are the guys who now end up as the four power guys after Galerius dies. Now, this political chaos is going on. And you would think that, hey, I'm strong, I'm popular, people like me, I should just go ahead and take over. Well, Constantine kind of does that. And this is what Constantine ends up doing, is he says, all right, I'm going to take my forces here. Nobody really likes Maxentus because Constantine, Maximinus, and Licinus all kind of recognize each other and say, okay, I recognize you, you recognize me, you're a Caesar, you're an Augustus, I'm a Caesar, but I don't like Maxentus. None of us recognize this guy. So they all say, you're a usurper. Well, what's the logical thing for good old Constantine, who just happens to be hanging around up north with all this resources that he's been garnering and his popularity and all the other stuff? Well, sure enough, Constantine comes down to Rome and takes out Maxentius. And what's really interesting is Maxentius is not that good of a leader. He's not that good of a ruler. He's actually kind of pretty sad. And he is not going to win. What we're going to see here is Maxentius, had he sort of been a little smarter about it, he would have just fallen back into Rome, hunkered down in the city and said, go ahead and have fun, Constantine, you're not going to get in the city, because Rome was very well fortified. But instead, he listened to his advisors, and he went out of the city and met the army of Constantine, and he's defeated. But here's where the story sort of begins with Constantine from a Christian perspective. Now, there were two guys, two historians that were there. One of them was Eusebius of Caesarea, which we're going to be talking about next. And there was another guy, Lectinus, something like that, who was there. And they kind of tell two stories about what happens just before Constantine meets Maxentius in battle. And this is, one of them says that Constantine had a vision or a revelation, and he received a command to place the Christian symbol on the shields of his soldiers. Now, the other stories was that, and this is I think from Eusebius, that he had as a vision in the sky appears the words, "In this you shall conquer." What that means, don't know. But what Constantine does is he tells his soldiers, I want you to put these two letters on our shields and on our standards. So they're going to take away the stuff that would normally be there for Rome, the pagan symbols and all, and he puts the chi and rho. These are two Greek letters, and of course they form the picture of chi rho. And you've seen this symbol used all over the place. And this is the symbol, the chi and rho. And those are the first two letters of Christ, or Christo, or Christos. And so a lot of people say, see, this is CHR. So that's basically what you got, CHR, in the way we would pronounce it. And so they say, look, they're putting the Christian symbol, the Christian leader, the God of the Christians, on the symbol. Now, he ends up defeating Maxentius, and he takes over Rome, and this is at the Milvian Bridge. Maxentius basically falls into the water and drowns, and he's defeated, and guess who's in charge of everything in the West? Well, Constantine. He is now the guy who's in charge. He has this power. Now, Licinius is the one who is the Augustus in the East. And so Licinius and Constantine meet in Milan. And in Milan, they say that we're going to stop persecuting Christians. Now remember, the edict of toleration, which Galerius has already done, is generally agreed to, but this guy, Maximinus Daie, he still is persecuting Christians. He doesn't like him any more than Galerius did. So when Licinius and Constantine agree on this in this Edict of Milan, this is where the quote-unquote, a lot of from church historians, this is where the final persecution of Christians is supposed to end. As, of course, as part of this deal, Licinius gets the half-sister in marriage of Constantine. So you're kind of, we're family, we'll be okay, we'll work together on this stuff. Now, what happens? Well, Constantine. Now we have this rise of Constantine. He's growing in power. He was a very well-respected man. And when his father died, his troops were very loyal to him. He was very smart. He was very capable. He kept peace. When he attacked Maxinius, he only used a small portion of his army, a quarter of it approximately. And so he kept his whole region. He kept the barbarians out. He kept order things. He now controls all this stuff. So he's being very smart. And with this kind of force and power and the chaos that's going on over here, what do you think would be the logical or the natural, maybe, the natural thing? I won't say necessarily logical, but the natural thing to do. What do you think? Do nothing, do something. What do you think? Yeah. The natural thing would be, hey, I'm on a roll. Let's attack. Let's catch them when they're off balance. Well, fortunately, Constantine's a little bit smarter than that. Again, even though it looks like a good thing, and sometimes being bold is going to win the day, more often than not, what you do when you take over a new area, the best thing to do is consolidate it. Build your strength. Have your forces being taken care of. Now, he's really smart. He has this peace treaty, a peace arrangement with Licinus, who, oh, by the way, what's he still having to do? Oh, he's got these pesky Persians down here he's having to fight. Maximinian Dias still has these tribes over here that they're having to deal with. So all these guys over here are already spending their military resources, and so with the peace treaty between these two guys, all Constantine does is say, hey, I'm just going to stabilize things. I'm going to make it all better. I'm going to make it peaceful. Well, if you are having peace and security for your citizens, what happens? What do you think? People get mad at you? People love you? People what? What do you think? Yeah, they're kind of going, maybe, okay, yeah, Constantine's a decent guy. He cares. Yeah, he cares. So basically, if you think about it, you're winning the loyalty of your citizens. All the people that are there and the people that you're worried about are going, well, this guy's not so bad. Yeah, he did come in, he did take over our lands, he did come in here and beat the guys up, and maybe some of the family died, but he's not such a bad guy. So while the other side, the East, is fighting, the West is building. And so Constantine's pretty smart about all that. Now, interestingly enough, there becomes an assassination attempt on Constantine, and it happens to be one of the brother-in-laws of Licinus. Oops, we got a problem here. So Constantine says, oh, it's so bad, sorry about that. I guess I'm just going to have to go to war with you because you tried to kill me. Or you sent your brother-in-law to do it. So he takes this opportunity. Again, this is taking a little bit of time to play out. And Constantine was way better than Licinus as a leader. And so he cuts off Licinus's resources and forces him to call to peace. In other words, he's smart. You understand that armies are logistics machines, not just military, but logistics. And so he takes out their logistics. He makes him sue for peace. Interestingly, he lets Licinus stay in power, but he still has the upper hand. And Licinus, of course, tries it again, except this time he says, oh, I'm going to be in charge. Constantine beats him. And the people, in particularly Christians, support Constantine more than Licinus. And guess what? All over in here, this is where the bulk of the Christians are. So Licinus, when he loses and Constantine is going to take over, these people are quite happy to go, Constantine, Cairo, Edict of Milan, he's beating these guys, Constantine's our guy. And we're going to see Eusebius of Caesarea, not this Eusebius of Nicomedia that we're going to talk about during the Arian heresy. He writes very favorably towards Constantine. But we'll talk more about that in another lesson. So, Constantine now goes, all right, I need to start over. I need to sort of build a new Rome. And so what does he do? He takes the city Byzantium. And Byzantium is where he says, I'm going to start my new capital city. This is right, stretching between the Europe and Asia, if you will. And this is where the Black Sea is, and the Bosporus and Dardanelles Straits and all that kind of fun stuff exists. And so he takes it and he says, this is going to be where my new Rome is, and I am going to take Byzantium, and it is going to become Constantinople, the city of Constantine. Now, he is quite interesting. Constantine is really complicated as to, is he saved? Is he not saved? Is he just a great political ruler? Whatever. But he is a good ruler. He is very good at it. And so he takes a lot of stuff. He takes pagan stuff, Christian stuff, and he's bringing it to the city. And he is setting up free taxes for people to come to the city. He says there's free wine and oil and wheat. So, you're like, okay, I can eat. There's no taxes. So I just have to sort of I'm close to the emperor. Maybe this isn't such a bad deal. And even when he's laying out the walls of where the city's walls are going to be, and Constantinople has a series of walls, he actually marches out and he has Christians and pagans following him. And they were asking, well, how far are you going to go out to where the wall is? He says, I think it was something like, when he who leads me tells me to stop. Now, talk about vague. So what do you think happens with the pagans? They go, what do you think? Yeah, they go, wow, see, he who leads me. The Sol Invictus, the sun god is the one who leads him. And then what are the Christians going? Well, of course, it's our God, Cairo. Look. So he's pretty shrewd about this kind of stuff. The problem is with all of this intermixing, he basically has what's referred to theologically or in any realm, syncretism. In other words, elements of these religions are sort of blending together and interspersing with each other, and it really kind of creates a weird mess. So now you got this Constantine guy that you're not really sure. Christians think he's Christian because, God, led him to victory. And the pagans are still going, well, he's kind of still pagan, because if you think about this, here's what this guy does. Constantine, first off, refuses to be under Christian teachers. So he's not going to be taught by anybody. Okay? Secondly, he calls himself the Bishop of Bishops. All right? In other words, he's the leader of all the bishops. But he also then takes part in pagan rituals. So he's taking part in pagan rituals at the same time. He imports pagan statues. He declares himself as the high priest and supreme pontiff of the paganism, of the pagan cults. So, okay, he's Bishop of Bishops, he's supreme high priest and pontiff and supreme pontiff. Okay, this guy is just like intermixing everything. Oh, by the way, I'm also the emperor. So he's the head of the church, he's the head of the state, he's the head of the pagan religions. So who is this guy and what is he really doing? You also know that he does not place himself under the teachings of the church, and yet we're going to see he calls great councils, the Council of Nicaea, to solve problems. He's not baptized till the end of his life, and he's actually baptized under the other Eusebius of Nicomedia, and this Eusebius is actually an Arian, and actually speaks for the Arians. We're going to talk about that later. So he's kind of a strange mix. I think Gonzalez kind of sums him up pretty well. Let me read to you what he said. He says, the truth is probably that Constantine was a sincere believer in the power of Christ. But this does not mean that he understood that power in the same way in which it was experienced by those Christians who had died for it. See, it would be very easy for him to say, like Nebuchadnezzar did, everybody needs to bow down to Daniel's God. That doesn't necessarily mean he's the only God, but he may be the most powerful God. And it could very well be that Constantine, coming out of this culture and background and all this other kind of stuff, that's kind of what he was thinking. I realize the power of Christ. But does he really understand the power of Christ? The true power of Christ, what Christ is really about, versus Christ is the one who can help me get stuff. He's the power behind stuff. And if I treat his people nicely, he's going to be nice to me. That's that question. Now, he may very well have been a believer. We don't know. But the way he behaved, he was either a sincere believer with political workings, which sometimes you kind of got to do if you're a politician, because that's what he is. He's a politician. Or you got to strong arm everybody into doing things your way. And we're going to see that when Christians rise to power, and this is going to seem sort of a setup for the next week or two, when Christians rise to power under Constantine, it's going to cause some real problems. When we get to Julian the Apostate, we're going to have some real issues because apostate's not usually one of those favorable things the church to label you. Now, one last thing I want to sort of talk about, just the way Constantine is. Let me read to you his title, and this is in Latin. His official title was, well, I'm not going to say it in Latin, but Imperator Caesar Flavius Constantius Pius Felix Invictus Augustus, which basically means Imperator Caesar Flavius Constantine Augustus, the pious, the fortunate, the undefeated. And after 312, he adds Maximus, which means the greatest. And after 325, and this is after Council of Nicaea, he replaces the undefeated with the victor, as Invictus, reminding of the Sol Invictus, the sun god. Okay, kind of an interesting thing. So if you wonder if he had a really powerful title and really bold title, he does. But that's not unusual for any of these guys. So what is happening with this sort of power shift with Constantine in the church? And again, this is going to set up this what we call the Imperial Church age, and a lot of stuff is going to fall out we're going to talk about in the next couple of weeks. But first off, if you remember, Christian worship was basically simple, mostly in private homes or large homes, and there were a few church buildings there. We know that. Not a lot, but there were some. And they'd be in catacombs or in caves or wherever they could sort of do their thing and be private. It was very simple. But see, after his conversion, we're going to see the development. Churches appear. Okay. Buildings, and these are actually built by the state, and all sorts of imperial signs of respect and behaviors start happening that are very not traditional Christian, if you will, from what the Christian church has been for the last 250 years. The bishops start wearing more luxurious garments because a lot of times they were being paid, and so they could afford it. And so as a sign of respect, instead of wearing your ratty clothes, look, I'm dressed up in a suit. I don't normally wear a suit. Could I just teach this lesson in flip-flops? I could, but trying to be respectful. So you kind of see people start thinking in those terms. Gestures were introduced. So these were movements or hand motions or types of things that sort of shared or were expressive of an idea or an opinion. This was very common in court. And so these things start getting introduced into the church. It becomes, this church has to now become truly Catholic in its, of the whole, but now Catholic more in the idea of under the same rule, if you will. This is going to, again, begin planting the seeds between East and West, because one of the things that we haven't talked about, but might as well mention it now, is in these particular time periods and going forward, there were what we called patriarchs. In other words, sort of senior regional bishops or whatever, they call them patriarchs. Well, there was one happened to be in Rome. There was one who happened to be in Constantinople, and this is going to become the Roman Catholic Church, and this is going to become the Eastern Orthodox Church. There was one in Antioch. There was one in Jerusalem, and there was one in Alexandria. And these ones in Antioch, Jerusalem, and Alexandria are still around when the Muslims come and sort of wipe out most of this area from a Christian perspective. But the two that remain for the longest that hold the sway and power are the ones out of Constantinople and eventually Rome. Now Rome goes down and comes back up, and we'll see how that all works out. But those five patriarchs are sort of regional guys. And so we also see the introduction of some other sort of fancier things. We start seeing processionals. In other words, coming down the aisles or in these churches, and they're processing, and they have incense, and they have starting to get choirs and singing and lamps and standards. Well, that's very Roman. That's very imperial. And so, we're worshiping God, and if we're going to do this for the emperor, we should certainly do it for God. This type of imperial creep that comes into things. Now think about this. You're hiding in a cave and your basic stuff, and you're very simple. Here comes the processional with all these people. This is going to be a big deal. So just guessing, what do you think is going to happen? What is going to be the reaction? We're going to talk about this in our next lesson, but what do you think? What do you think is going to happen? They're going to like it? Not going to like it? What else? Are they going to stay? Are you going to leave? Start your own church? Go with the flow? Use it for evangelism? All sorts of things that are going to happen. It's going to be challenging. We're going to see a lot of reactions to this. Because, see, we also see that the congregations, of course, are going to become less active in the worship service. When you're a small group, you're kind of talking and interacting and things like that. When you have a big group, it's really hard for 200 people or 300 people to talk and interact. It just doesn't work very well. And when you add the imperial element to it, you kind of sit there and listen and watch, sort of watch the show kind of thing. That's kind of challenging. We also see that as Christians celebrated communion, where martyrs were buried in the 2nd century, Constantine, during his time, starts building churches on the tops of martyrs' graves. So this is a place that's special for somebody who was a solid witness, people remembering their faithfulness. Constantine says, well, let's build a church there. And his mom actually builds the Church of the Nativity. He believes, Empress Helena. She thinks she found the cross of Christ in Golgotha and all this other kind of stuff. And she builds that Church of the Nativity. The one that we know today, that was the one she built. The other thing is when this martyr's grave in churches type of thing, people start becoming more and more with the idea of relics. And this is going to become big in the Middle Ages, but this idea starts developing. That this is a special sacred place now. Because look, we have a martyr here and the church is here. Ultimately, that's where you end up with St. Peter's Basilica. This is the Roman architecture that we're going to talk about. That this is where they build these churches, which then basilica is a style that becomes the names of churches. And they start saying, well, this is where Peter's bones are. We still have Peter's bones, and this is where we're going to build this big church, the Basilica, St. Peter's Basilica. However, as we were just talking about, we see the influx of all sorts of people because it's cool to be a Christian now. Matter of fact, it's popular to be matter of fact, it's good to be a Christian now. And everybody's looking around going, where were you? You guys, weren't you guys the ones accusing me and beating me last week? But I saw the light. It's kind of weird. It would be really hard. I mean, if half of Denver sort of showed up in our doorstep saying, I believe, because, you have to, otherwise you don't have a job. Wow. That would be, what do you do? How do you deal with that? And it's going to be quite amazing. And the thing that we're going to see first, and we're going to look at next week, is the idea of the monastic movements. Not that they hadn't already sort of started, but we're going to talk a little bit more detail, and we're going to see how that all plays out. There's people who stay in the church, and there's people who leave the church, and we're going to see how this whole thing comes full circle. So, if you have any questions, talk with me after class. Again, that's a lot of material, a lot of stuff going on, and I wish I could say, yes, Constantine's saved, Constantine's not saved, he was a believer, he's not a believer. Really hard to tell. Is he just a good politician who's a believer? Is he a heretic? Does he really believe, but he doesn't understand? You don't know. But one thing is for certain, the church is about to change. And so we're going to explore those changes here in our next coming 3, 4, 5 lessons. So it's going to be quite a bit of a shift.